in the new year 2025. Matt, how you doing, brother?
Happy New Year, David. I'm doing well. It is, 2025. Definitely, I probably say this every single year since 2010, but it feels very futuristic.
I mean, it was funny. I was talking to something I had done in 2004 to somebody, a trip I went on, and I was like, 20 years ago, I was like, oh my God. Yeah. I mean, I was 12, but anyways, starting to have to think in terms of decades. But Matt, I mean, we're going to be back on Tuesday with a pretty in-depth conversation about some of the wild revelations that we've had over the past couple of weeks about the Kamala Harris campaign and all of that. But we wanted to talk this Sunday about a big row amongst the right, particularly around the H1B program. Matt, I mean, do you want to sort of catch us up for folks who have been sort of hopefully spending time with their families and not keeping up with right-wing insanity?
Yeah, so basically this all started off with a split in the Republican side of things, where I believe Laura Loomer taking issue with this H1B program thing. I think because she's been spurned by the palace, and so that prompted Vivek Ramaswamy to take to Twitter and say, actually, we need H1B visas, and he rehearsed Charles Murray's argument in Coming Apart, which is that there's a cultural deficiency in Americans. That means that they can't be hired, that they're not competitive enough. And that's why these companies like Elon Musk's companies or Disney or whoever need to take in the best and brightest for workers from wherever, the other parts of the world, to fill this knowledge gap. That's how that's being sold. Now, it's been interesting because, obviously, that's one of the primary contradictions that everyone could have foresaw with regards to this. I mean, we did a video about why capitalists like Trump support strong border policies a long time ago, and it's because they like things like ICE, because when they are trying to cow the illegal labor, immigrant labor that they are using into submission, they could point to it and say, hey, you're going to get deported. Trump did that with the Trump Tower. Elon Musk, with regards to illegal labor, I forget, do we have instances of that? But generally, that's the thing with capitalists. And Elon Musk, of course, is a major user of this H1B program. So Bernie Sanders got involved, and not out of nowhere, I would say. Bernie Sanders he signed a letter with Jeff Sessions in 2015 about this H1B abuse because Disney was in the news. 60 Minutes in particular did a story about them replacing a bunch of their workers and making the replaced workers train the workers who were coming in to replace them. We'll actually play a little bit, but here's Bernie Sanders' tweet that got a lot of people upset. And I think that should be showed here. Actually, I'm just going to share the screen so we can see it all. Bernie Sanders writes, Elon Musk is wrong. And notice he's not saying, and so many people are saying, because he's saying that, he's saying Nick Fuentes and Laura Loomer are right. And I think that's just fatuous. I think people need to grow the fuck up.
We'll get there in a second, yeah.
The main function of the H1B program is not to hire the best and brightest, but rather to replace good-paying American jobs with low-wage indentured servants from abroad. The cheaper the labor they hire, the more billionaires they make. Now, what's interesting is let's get into some of the various types of responses we've got to that. I saw Eric Levitz tweet that and said, the average pay or the median pay is this, so that doesn't really sound like indentured servitude.
Well, Matt, I'm sorry, do you mind before we do that, let's just really quickly, just to lay out the position here, right? So the H1B program is a program that's supposed to be set up, or the argument for it is that it brings in highly specialized labor to fill in gaps in the American labor force, right? And it is a very specific program. It's a program though that brings in a lot of workers. I think there's something like over 600,000 workers in the United States on the program. They usually, in recent years, they've been getting over 100. Sorry, they've been approving. That's not the total amount that have been approved, but they've been approving over 100,000 new applications year by year, right? So this is not a important program. And we'll get into like a lot of the specifics of it, I'm sure, as we go on. But the reason why people oppose it on the left and why Bernie Sanders opposes it is because it is a program that, one, it weakens labor because those workers are tied to their visa, which means they are tied to their boss, which means they can be forced out of the country. And it's not, a small part of the program at all, having that ability to discipline labor. On top of it, as we're going to get into, there's a lot of noise that people like Levitz, and I'm sure some of these other folks are going to get into about what the idea of the H-1B visa program is, what it might even say on paper versus how it is used in practice. And particularly this wage issue is a significant one. And we have, plenty of figures to show y'all about how, yes, it does do exactly the thing that Bernie Sanders is rightfully pointing it out, which is drive down the wages in those industries. But anyways, we can go through all these folks, but I just want to make really clear why this is something that matters, and sort of push back against some of the kind of simplistic arguments being made for the program that are out there.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, there's this Disney case. Let's watch this Disney video here of this employee just talking about it. We can talk. And there's this website called That Park Place, which appears to be a very critical of Disney website that has done a little bit of compilation on this. But here is this guy talking about Disney.
I walked into a small conference room with about 24 highly respected fellow IT workers. The Disney executive made a harsh announcement to us all. All of you in this room will be losing your jobs in the next 90 days. Your jobs have been given over to a foreign workforce. In the meantime, you will be training your replacements until your jobs are 100% transferred over to them. And if you do not cooperate, you will not receive any severance pay. I was completely silent during this meeting, thinking how this was going to affect my coworkers. How was I going to break news to my family and pay all of our expenses? I would soon be living on unemployment. Later that same day, I clearly remember going to the local church pumpkin sale and having to tell the kids I couldn't buy any that year because my job was being turned over to a foreign worker. I started to think what kind of an American I was becoming. Was I going to become part of ruining our country by taking severance pay in exchange for training my foreign replacement? How many other American families would be affected by the same foreign worker that I trained?
Now, I do think there's a certain type of person who hears the repetition of foreign worker there, and I think might get a little bit squeamish. The truth is that there needs to be labor organized, and so that people can't have their jobs replaced willy-nilly like this in general. But this is just an objective thing that happens. And it's not done by Disney or Tesla or whoever for diversity. It's done for their bottom line. That's the clear motivation for them using. And you look at the Economic Policy Institute, will link to some research. They've done probably the most research on this. It's actually like 30 companies. And it's ones you've heard of that are using this, like Disney, Deloitte, right? Like and they're doing it, and and I want to shift to like the Rucker Bregman response to like, but immigration is good, because I think Bhaskar Sankara actually had the proper frame, which is that maybe I can find that tweet, but that ultimately like immigration is good, but these guest worker programs are basically a worst of both worlds. And like, yes, I understand that immigration net benefits the country that is going to it. Under these circumstances, these specific circumstances, that benefit is all going to CEOs and shareholders, and that's how they like it, and that's why it is being defended so vigorously.
And also, like, I mean, I really do want to like continue getting into the specifics of why this program is bad, but like, that clip that you just played for people listening, it has a watermark from an organization called Numbers USA. I don't know if you're familiar with them, Matt. They're very nasty, like kind of like anti-immigrant immigrant organization. And this is, again, like the point of why holding up very flawed and damaging programs like this, because we've been talking about the effects to American workers, right, who are losing their jobs. There's the other side of what the experience is like for the workers on these programs in the United States as well. But when you stand up and defend flawed programs that create a lot of damage for people, both foreign workers and American workers, you create a huge opportunity for the right wing. As you can see in how these things are being sort of framed by certain folks on the right. Or back in August of 2020, there was a piece by our good friend Fred Stafford, who you've definitely read in Damage and Jacobin and other places. He wrote a piece called "How Trump Got His Right-Wing New Deal Victory." And what that story is about how H1B workers were being used to attack the union in the TVA. And the same kind of story as we were just seeing with Disney, where a bunch of union workers were being forced out of their jobs and then were being forced to train their replacements, who were being brought in to try to bust and weaken the power of organized labor in the South. And what ends up happening there is because a bunch of people on the left liberal side were extremely squeamish about coming in and standing up for those workers, then guess what happens? Jeff Sessions and Donald Trump get themselves involved, and then they get to present it as, look, the Republican Party and our kind of nativist agenda is out here actually delivering for workers, while a lot of the people on the left liberal side were completely in cahoots with the anti-union forces, right? When you aren't standing up for workers here. So this is like a very clear example of how leftists and like liberals wanting to engage with these kind of material questions on like a level of abstraction and like morality, right? Instead of like actually what is going on, creates a huge opportunity for the right wing to be able to swoop in either rhetorically or in this case actually get the credit for pushing back on the abuses of this program.
Yeah, there's a piece in Jacobin 2 years ago. Biden can fix the anti-worker H1B immigration visa scam. Just a couple paragraphs to your point about the conditions that these actual workers themselves, the H1B migrant workers, again, like very few of these folks end up getting citizenship, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like a fraction of them. But the H1B program's failures are almost too many to list. Most H1B workers are vastly underpaid, earning less than the market average for their occupation and location. Government inaction allows large-scale wage theft of H1B workers. While some H1B workers do possess rare skills that benefit the U.S. economy, most who are admitted possess ordinary skills that are abundantly available in the U.S. and end up filling entry-level jobs. H1B workers are placed in working arrangements akin to indentured servitude. Program rules subsidize the outsourcing and offshoring of U.S. jobs and fissure the U.S. workforce. And just two examples, Hank Nguyen and Judy Konopka are typical and instructive. Their employers, University of California and Eversource Energy, respectively, explored the visa program to replace them with indentured underpaid H-1B workers. Actually, these aren't the immigrant workers. And then add insult to injury by forcing them to train their replacements before terminating them. On the flip side of the work program, software engineer Gobi Muther Periasamy, a college-educated H-1B worker from India, was sued by his employer to prevent him from switching jobs as he searched for better pay and working conditions. And that's the thing, is it is very obvious why these companies are doing this. It is because they are saving. I mean, here it is from this other article from the Park Place. This article is titled "Disney's History with H-1B Visas: A Case Study." Mm-hmm. The principal reason that firms use H-1B visas to replace American workers is because the H-1B non-immigrant workers are much cheaper than locally recruited and hired U.S. workers. Table 1 shows Infosys and Tata pay low wages to the H-1B workers. The average wage for H-1B employee at Infosys was $70,000, and for Tata it was $65,000. Compare that to the average wage of a computer systems analyst in Rosemead, California, where it's located, which is $90,000. So when people say, look at these, whatever these high or median income levels are, and say, wouldn't you like that? Does that sound like an indentured servitude? First of all, it doesn't just matter about how that individual feels about getting that money, right? And being locked in that place of employment. It's also what that's doing to the wages around it. If it's 120, but the prevailing wage for that job would be 140, who's benefiting from that?
Yeah.
It's not everybody. It is the CEOs, and one thing I think Bernie probably could do is it's not just greedy CEOs. It's shareholders. This is the competitiveness of the American economy we're talking about. I see all these articles about how Elon Musk is able to spur his workforce on to such, heroic deeds and productivity. Well, part of that might be because of dynamics like this one, where they're being absolutely squeezed and pressured and undercut, and when they turn 35 and want that nice raise because they want to like set up their family for us a while, actually it's not time for that raise. It's time for Tesla or Disney or whoever to save $20,000 a year by making you train somebody who they can get in on a visa.
Mm. Yeah, and I mean, let's also remember too that again, this is I think, as we said earlier, like a very classic example of the way that like a lot of liberals will try to engage in politics in an abstracted way instead of like an actual way. So all the criticisms of Bernie Sanders that we've seen, where people are like, "Oh my God, he's playing footsie with the right." Again, ignore the very clear labor issues here because they want to talk. It's the same way, like, whenever, Matt, we criticize an actually anti-democratic organization like the Supreme Court, right? And how damaging it is to American democracy, how anti-worker it is, and certainly how dangerous it is for any kind of positive project in this country. Well, you'll get all these kind of abstract arguments from liberals being like, well, it's about checks and balances and protecting the minority from the tyranny of the majority. And it's like, okay, well, have you looked at American history? Have you looked at how well the Supreme Court has functioned in terms of protecting minorities? No, the minority that is protected has been the rich, right? So this H1B program is a very classic example of this because, again, they say, well, actually, according to the letter of the law, they should be paying the prevailing wage. Well, as EPI, Economic Policy Institute, points out, the way that the H1B wage is calculated is extremely flawed. So they're able to fudge the numbers and pay wages that are not typical to the job. The wages that are being paid to other workers doing that same job.
Those people have to come up with a motivation then besides like cost saving that Elon Musk and Disney are motivated for. And I'm sorry, it's not because they wanted more diverse America.
No, it's because FedEx is really worried about the racial makeup. I mean, it's absurd. And then especially when you look at some of the examples, that we're seeing, the idea that this is only affecting white workers, right? Which is bad enough if it's affecting workers, right? By the way, but the fact is, it is something that is across the spectrum. As the examples you showed from that Jacobin article, showed that it's not just like this kind of like replacement theory anxiety, right? There is actual suffering that's going on, and also it's
being capitalized by those people almost exclusively. And if Bernie tries to get in on it with the actual class message, he is being smeared as a nativist.
It's really absurd. This is a program that is being used by some of the most evil corporations in America to wage war on working class people and to hold workers in bad working conditions and in subservience to them. And yet, instead of having a conversation about that, we're having this like other conversation. Like, these people are trying to have this other conversations about like, do you think America is better if it's more diverse or less diverse, right? Which again is not what Google is interested in. It's not what Disney is interested in. It's not what FedEx is interested in. And it's very helpful for them when instead of actually looking, oh wow, what's going on underneath the hood here with this program? Oh, it's a first principle debate about like, what ethnic makeup of America is ideal, right? And look, and the right is great at this too, right? It's two similar versions of this, right? The right has been having a field day utilizing some of the justified frustration with this program to promote some of the nastiest racism I've seen on that platform in a while. Just the extent of it, at least.
Yeah, and what's funny is like the Bernie thing. Here's Dylan Matthews, a Vox writer, if you can believe it. This has always been Bernie's position. Granted, thank you, Dylan. That's true, because a lot of people think that Bernie is all of a sudden just trying to, what is it? Obey in advance, Trump.
Yeah.
However, he always makes an exception for dairy farm guest workers, which he believes are incredibly necessary. This actually proves the point, because Bernie is not anti-migrant labor even at all. In that situation, those are jobs that, yeah, man, when Bernie says young kids in Vermont aren't going into dairy farm, my mom's from dairy farms. Like people are leaving that field of work. It's not a desirable one, right? And so you should have a formal system. I think those people should be given citizenship more, but you should have a formal system to make sure, like that probably makes sure there's less labor abuse on those sorts of in ag than there would be if you don't have some sort of formal structure. The situation with tech jobs is not the same. You have massive layoffs of all sorts of qualified people. Why? Because these tech companies need to be more profitable for their investors. And the easy way to do that is to replace a workforce across the board with a whole bunch of people that are going to ask for $20,000 less per year than that.
Yeah. And also, I would just add one last economic point on this too. That actually some of the prevailing abusers of the H1B visa program are subcontracting companies, right? So companies that are bringing in a bunch of people to then go and work at, because I know the EPI came out with this very startling allegation against one of these companies that had underpaid around $95 million to their workers. Or being contracted out to Disney, FedEx, Google, other major companies, right? So remember again that this idea too that like, oh, we just don't have anybody here who can do this job. Therefore, we need to get people from other countries to come here and do that. Is fine in the abstract, but what is actually happening is the innovation, like many of these other innovations, are not radically shifting or changing production. So how can we do this for cheaper?
Yeah.
And
just like the EPI guys, who I think, they also wrote the Jacobin article, they're listen to what they're actually asking for. And the legislation that has basically been proposed by Bernie a number of times, including the first thing he ever got passed, I believe as a senator, maybe it was in Congress. But the Biden administration can follow a clear path. Close the loophole that incentivizes outsourcing, raise wage rates for H1B workers so they match U.S. standards, ensure U.S. workers have a legitimate opportunity to apply for jobs open to H-1B workers, investigate rampant wage theft, and allocate H-1B visas by prioritizing the most highly skilled workers rather than through a random lottery. Mm-hmm. I mean, none of that is extreme nativism. And here's Bhaskar Sankara, his tweet. I think is just well stated. Immigration isn't zero sum. Workers coming to the U.S. produce surplus that benefits the economy as a whole. But guest worker programs are the kind of worst of all worlds from a labor perspective. And that is precisely because, look, more workers the better. I have been on record saying my home area, North Dakota, would be better if there was less racism and more immigration, because nobody can build a fucking house there, right? There literally isn't enough work. But you cannot you have to have that controlled not by people like Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy and Disney and Jeff Bezos. It has to be done in concert with labor leaders. This is what even a guy like Rutger Bregman, he says in the abstract he believes, but then you can't address a specific program like H1B by saying in the abstract. He basically has the same position that Bhaskar says, except coming down and saying that's why we can't defend H1B, right?
Well, it's because it's because the way a lot of folks like that argue, and the way a lot of liberals and progressives think about politics, is that if you, by making the correct arguments and accurately portraying reality like Bernie Sanders is, you're opening up the door for the right. And when you do that, again, you create a situation where what is it called when you omit something? From a statement? Yes. Right. And so what does that make you, right? And what does it make the right seem like? It seems like the left is liars and the right are truth tellers, right?
Exactly.
And this is a problem on issue after issue with these folks, where instead of treating the public like responsible adults where they can interact with the information. You can present it in a correct way to them. You say, well, what if we omit this because we don't trust people to be able to make the correct conclusions from this information? It's condescending, first of all, but secondly, it's extremely dangerous because it's a huge opportunity for the right to be able to utilize these moments.
You're exactly right. I mean, this is maybe the last thing I got to say on this, but somebody come at me saying, if you've got an axe to grind with the program, grind away. This is still a step toward national logics on immigration that we shouldn't be indulging right now. It's bad political hygiene. And my response was, the idea that this is a personal axe to grind is fatuous. A step we shouldn't be indulging, but these people are, is that Elon and Musk are standing up to racists and for meritocracy. Insulting intelligence to people is bad political hygiene that I'm trying to avoid.
I think that's perfect. And look, I'll just say that, one thing that's important to remember is that Trump has come out and said that, he supports the program. So there's a nice little unity.
That's the thing is, like, it's Bernie against Elon and Trump, and the libs are saying, Bernie, why are you siding with Laura Loomer? Yeah. And I'm sorry, that's just not serious. It's not serious. And I guess, like, maybe we should put our cards on the table as far as predictives. Like, I think that that there's too much riding for corporate America on this H1Bs, and I think that's why Elon and Trump said we're not going to touch it. Now, I don't like the trajectory this country's on with regards to racism and nativism. Mm-hmm. I will say that fairly. And so I am concerned that in a pinch, I mean, what do we really expect, David? We expect, like what we said, is spectacle type harassment of migrants to try to. I mean,
and a lot of pain from that too. Like, not saying that to discredit it, but again, like, they're out. It's just like, this is the reality of it. Is that, like, Trump and Trumpism, feel is like unique in many ways, but it's also very simple on another aspect, which is that Trump is like one of the most owned politicians there is, and you see where the rhetoric and even the spirit or like the philosophy of what you might think it is that they're, his movement is articulating, right? Agree with it or disagree with it. You see it runs up against a very, very clear wall. When it differentiates itself too much from the interest of like the American wealthy and ruling class, and this is a pretty clear example of that. Well, Matt, I'm sure you're saying something really charming, but you've muted yourself.
I was just saying it's good to start off 2025 in a punchy sort of mood.
I'm feeling good. Yeah, well, we have a lot coming for y'all over the next few weeks. So thank you so much for coming over and supporting the program, and really looking forward to getting through whatever's coming down the pike with the rest of y'all.
Peace.